Hi guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Ferrari have given their perspective on the absolute strategy disaster class from the Australian Grand Prix. Sauber and Stroll outperforming both of the Ferraris after the 7th and 8th in qualifying. Surely it couldn't get any worse than that. That it did. Hamilton especially was deeply frustrated with the lack of radio communications when it actually mattered. The fact that both of the McLarens were off the track into the gravel, and yet both of the Ferrari drivers weren't informed that actually they should probably be coming into the box for the Inters. That was a serious error, and one that Fred Vasseur is having to deal with again. Similar problems for Ferrari as McLaren potentially could romp away with this championship. There were some scary signs with Andrea Stella admitting that apparently Lando Norris at the end of the Grand Prix had floor damage, yet still won it pretty emphatically. Very much on Twitter your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. We're going to start right about here. This is actually a really cool story of Carlos Sainz after being out of the Grand Prix was on the pit wall advising Williams on their strategy decisions to such an extent it seems that Carlos was like, look, he's not going to be able to last on those tyres, guys. You know, I know this. I was in the car a few minutes ago. Let's get him into the box now. And it worked out massively well for Williams. We thought it was a P4 for Albon. It actually wasn't a P4 in the end. It was a P5 because Antonelli's placement was reinstated. We'll get to that here in a second. But yeah, this is what James Val says. We had a useful additional strategist on the pit wall. So even though Sainz didn't have the conclusion to the Grand Prix that he wanted, and Albon, you know, sizably moves ahead of him, let's say, in the World Drivers' Championship. And, you know, who knows how many other results like this that Williams are even going to be able to secure all season, but their car's still looking very solid and very impressive at that. They look like a great team over there at Williams, and that's a great thing to see. Now, let's talk Antonelli, because Ollie Behrman and Antonelli were the only two drivers, rookies, to actually finish the race. I think outside of them, Bortoletto was the other impressive rookie. Okay, yes, he crashed. There were some questions about his suspension. I looked into it a little bit. People were talking about how he was complaining about the rear of the car for a long time. I mean, before he hit the wall, the rear suspension went, but obviously he was already during the spin at that point, so maybe it was putting extra pressure on that part of the car. Who knows? Regardless, Bortoletto did a good job until he didn't, and Antonelli and Behrman finished the race, but it wasn't a good weekend for Behrman, really. Okay, he finished the Grand Prix, but he was off the track many a time before then and in the wall on the first day as well. Antonelli was really the standout. I mean, like, I'd have voted him driver of the day personally. I think it was incredibly impressive. Like, he had that one spin after he overtook Hülkenberg, and then he overtook him again at the end of the Grand Prix, which was, again, something that neither of the Ferraris could muster, which was pretty crazy, right? The fact that at the end of the race, Hülkenberg was in P7 and neither of the Ferraris can actually make that move stick was pretty remarkable. But Mercedes tried really hard, and fair play to them, I guess, to try and get Antonelli's P4 reinstated. Because, I don't know, in the last couple of years, it doesn't seem like Mercedes have always given their all, let's say, in terms of getting penalties overturned and things like this. But they did try on Antonelli because they apparently had new evidence, which is very rare this actually happens. He got done for an unsafe release, or basically not his fault really, the team's fault, but apparently there was roll hoop camera footage, which was not initially available to the stewards at the time, that was downloaded post-race, and it was clear that car number 12 did not cross into the fast lane until a significant distance down the pit lane, and only after the driver checked his mirror to confirm clearance with car number 27. So that's what the stewards determined, and therefore they overturned the 5-second penalty, and that put Kimi Antonelli up to P4 on his debut, which is truly a pretty unbelievable drive. Now, obviously, there was some luck here involved, and it's not like his qualifying was good. I mean, he was P16, but actually, he was P16, but only like 6/10 off the P1 time during Q1. And he got floor damage, and okay, that was his fault because he went on the gravel earlier in the session, but it's not like Antonelli's qualifying was necessarily that bad. It just didn't work out in his favour. Started P16. We know from Junior Series this guy is incredibly talented in wet conditions, and he proved it again yesterday. I mean, okay, he made that one mistake starting off the track at turn 4, whatever it is, but apart from that, he was pretty on it the entire time. Had really good pace, had confidence that other drivers didn't seem to be able to handle, and when it mattered, was able to capitalise and get the job done on Alex Albon at the end of the Grand Prix to take the P4 away. Of course, like the whole Grand Prix, Hamilton, and okay, the Ferrari wasn't as good as the Mercedes yesterday, but Hamilton was stuck behind Albon for a very, very long time. Antonelli wasn't stuck behind him for that long before he made the move happen. So, obviously different cars and everything, but I just thought it was notable that Albon is a very, very good defensive driver around Albert Park, especially especially, and just a very good defensive driver in general. But Antonelli was able to get the job done, move up the road, and frankly, like Antonelli was, I know that Russell was probably just coasting to the end of the race to secure the podium, but Antonelli was closing in on Russell fast. And if we had a few more laps, that would have become, I think, really tasty for the final podium spot. And that is a statement as far as I'm concerned. It's interesting, right? Because the last couple of years, there's been a running joke about how, oh, you let Russell start from pole, Hamilton for P20, they'll finish the race together. Well, kind of the same thing happened yesterday, right? Russell starts right up front, Antonelli starts at the back, they finish the race together. And this was the best result for a rookie since 2007, right? I mean, 2015, Felipe Nasr got a P5. But Antonelli's P4 was the most impressive rookie result since, a very, very long time indeed. And it's pretty rare that a rookie gets put in a great car on his debut. And Verstappen did score points at a younger age when he was 17 years old at Malaysia. But that was not the same, point scoring that Antonelli delivered yesterday. So, real sign of the future to come, I think. Like, definitely watching this Grand Prix weekends, it's undisputed, in my opinion, that Toto Wolff and Mercedes have made the right call putting Antonelli in the car. And given this weekend was so challenging in many respects, I know that Antonelli's had so much testing time, more so than many other rookies. And yes, the rain and the other factors played into his advantage, but he still had to capitalise on it. And capitalise on it he most certainly did. And, there was not many votes on this poll, but he still received almost half the vote in terms of who was the most impressive driver of the day. And even if you look at some of these times, this was the fastest lap time of any driver on the intermediate. Now, towards the end, of course, that was, Norris and Verstappen were pushing each other hard. Norris was at a 1:27.1. Max's fastest was a 1:27.4. Piastri a bit further behind. But the fourth fastest lap time of the Inters of the day was from Antonelli with a 1:28.1. Alonso was actually, there as well. Russell was at a 1:29.0. You can see the two Ferraris way behind. But, the fact that Antonelli's fastest lap time was outside of the front runners, the closest to them, I think was pretty impressive and notable as well. So, really impressed by Antonelli. Bright future ahead of him. I think he's going to have many more spectacular Grand Prix this season. He's probably going to be in the wall a few times this season. It is what it is. It's what comes with being a rookie at that level. But as far as debuts go, it doesn't get much better than that as far as I'm concerned. Really, since Verstappen, we've not had a rookie this exciting on the grid. And of course, we will watch his career with great interest. So let's talk about the front runners though. Of course, Albon ended up finishing fourth, but Antonelli eventually got back to fourth because of the 5-second penalty getting removed. But Norris won from Verstappen by about 9/10 of a second in the end. But Max wasn't, that unhappy about this really. I think that Red Bull are hoping, at least confident, that as the season goes on, they can get a bit stronger with upgrades coming to the car and potentially, the flexi-wing changes might affect things come Spain, of course. And last year, Verstappen was out of this Grand Prix very early, right? He scored 0 points in Australia last year after the brake issue that he had. So 18 points more than last year is actually a pretty decent result. And yes, he yields the lead of the World Championship for the first time in like 3 years. But nonetheless, it's still a decent day for Max. Lando's speaking with lots of confidence as well after the victory, and fair play to him, to be fair, because he did manage difficult conditions. Okay, sure, he made a couple of errors along the way, but, difficult to not make errors in those conditions, especially when you're the first man arriving to the scene. I think this is often a talking point, right? That, you don't really know how much grip there's going to be. You're the first driver getting to that point of the track. You don't have a reference point of the driver in front of you, whether their, rear end has just slipped out or whether they're struggling or whatever. So, Lando says, yeah, sure, we do have the best car. McLaren are happy to admit that now, whereas they weren't necessarily happy to admit that before the season officially begun. But he says, look, not everything's about the car. Whether that's a little shot at Oscar, I don't know. But definitely that teammate rivalry is going to be very interesting. Andrea Stella as well. This, I think, is the scary thing before we discuss the Ferrari prospect, is that reportedly Lando picked up some floor damage. Now, whether that was when he went off the track on the gravel, when both himself and Oscar Piastri went off at that time, not exactly sure. But Stella says one issue we had on the final laps of the race with Lando was that he had the floor pretty badly damaged. He had lost, I haven't heard the numbers yet, but he lost aero performance. Now, so what that was in terms of performance is a question mark. I mean, we've heard Horner talk about this before in previous years with Verstappen struggling with floor damage and losing lap time. seems to still be the case here as well for Lando. What that was in terms of numbers, I don't know. And when we hear, because apparently, presumably we will hear what type of performance he was losing, then we can really gain a stronger understanding of how good that McLaren might be. Because, he was still holding off Verstappen on the final few laps, but it was maybe closer than we expected. I thought Lando might just pull away. But no, Max did keep it competitive. But yeah, Stella says that he couldn't utilise the full pace of the car. So the situation got more tense than it would otherwise have been, which is pretty ominous, right? The fact that Lando had some floor damage and was still winning the Grand Prix from a safety car restart without too much difficulty. Pretty scary for the rivals. And as Marco says, McLaren is simply doing better than us when it comes to tyre wear. But we do have, according to Marco, Red Bull, a big step forward pace-wise they hope to bring between the third and the fifth races. So I think, after China we go Japan, and then it's like Bahrain again. So, that's kind of what they're looking at, really, to bring a major upgrade along a couple of rounds into the season that they believe might take them forward. So, I think that Red Bull and presumably Mercedes and Ferrari will figure things out at some point relatively soon. It may be a similar story to last year where McLaren really deliver some dominance at the start of the season in the same way that Red Bull did last year, and then at some point things start to turn around. And this is the thing for Max, is that despite the very tricky conditions, he still got the job done and limited the damage on a weekend where McLaren were clearly the strongest machine, and Piastri will be pretty gutted about that one. These were just some comments as well on the drivers, talking about the fact that they were driving around with marshals on the track and recovery vehicles on the track. It's not a great set of circumstances. I think at times it's a bit of a necessary evil. Now, do I really ever trust the driver's opinion on this? Because, they're racing drivers, like, they're going to feel like they've got everything under control. But it was still interesting, right? So Lando was asked, basically, were you comfortable driving around in those conditions? Would you prefer it to have been red flagged? And Norris said, yeah, I thought it was fine. Verstappen said the same, and Russell said it was fine as well. So, just thought it was interesting really to hear their perspective. But let's talk about the Scuderia, because, of all the teams to have a terrible weekend, there were some teams with a bad weekend. I mean, even Racing Bulls finished with a very disappointing result. I mean, they screwed up Tsunoda's strategy. Hadjar was in the wall on the formation lap. They could have scored some serious points. So tough for Yuki as well, right? Because he had such a great weekend and then screwed over by strategy in the same way that Ferrari screwed over their drivers with strategy, with not pitting what they should have done. That really limited their potential. So, unfortunate, because Yuki had a great weekend, but he'll go down at the end of the weekend with 0 points. And that is pretty rough when it comes to pitching to other teams. But, hopefully other teams will look past some of those limitations. But, Hamilton 10th on his debut, one of the weaker Ferrari debuts that you tend to see. But looking at the weekend, it's not a massive surprise. And there were loads of issues for Ferrari this weekend. The car wasn't very fast, especially on the Saturday. They looked okay on the Friday. Like Leclerc topped the practice session. They looked like they were going to be in the mix, and I frankly expected that they would have been in the mix. Not how the weekend concludes. And I think the main discussion for Ferrari to think about, obviously the car is a massive point of importance. There's clearly a lot they still need to understand about getting the maximum out of it and what upgrades they may need to bring. The reason why they changed the car so substantially is because Ferrari thought if they didn't, McLaren were just going to run away with it, no problem. They changed the car, they changed the front suspension with the intention to bring higher development potential from the machine. That may or may not be true as time goes on, and they may be suffering the consequences at the start of the year. But it wasn't just about the car. We can talk about the car in the coming days, what they need to change, what the pace deficit was. But I think, again, it was a kind of, welcome to Ferrari Lewis Hamilton when it comes to the radio communication, the strategy decisions, and all of the other issues that Ferrari often get criticised for. This is the type of Grand Prix where the teams that nail it when it comes to strategy, they're the teams that win and the drivers that win. And Verstappen and Red Bull always seem to get it right in these scenarios and put themselves in the best possible position. Ferrari, on the other hand, absolutely not. So, the big point, really, now I know Ferrari weren't having a good race anyway, but when the rain was coming down and when there was an opportunity to capitalise on it, that's when Norris was off the track, Piastri was off the track and stuck in the grass with, his hard tyres. And still, Ferrari on the radio were not very clear about what they should do. They decided to leave Hamilton and Leclerc out, which, I mean, was it a masterstroke if it wasn't raining elsewhere in the circuit? Sure, but it was, and the other teams knew that. I mean, Norris went off the track and immediately dived into the pits, which was definitely the correct decision at the time because it wasn't easy to make that call, but he decided, no, this is too wet, I need to get the intermediate tyres on. Even if it's not raining elsewhere on the track, it's so bad in that final sector, and the rain is continuing to come down, and, you know, there's no way I can survive this. So Norris made the good call there, as seemingly did McLaren, but Ferrari had all the information. By the time that Hamilton and Leclerc had spun round as well, by the time they arrived onto the scene, all the info was there to say, all right, guys, you know, we're going to have to box. Now, maybe they wanted to take the gamble and say, well, if we stay out magically, this might work. Maybe you try that with one of your drivers if you really want to. But the problem was that Ferrari didn't really seem to understand what the rain was actually doing, because the rain happens. Hamilton knew it was coming. He was informed that it was going to be, you know, a little bit of rain in the final sector, but he wasn't informed that it was raining elsewhere on the track. As soon as he went past the pit entry, he was probably thinking, oh my God, this is like not going to work out at all. As he says, he held out as long as he could. The guidance in terms of how much more rain was coming was missing there. So I think we missed out. We try and have conversations with the pit wall, but the information that I got was that it was a short shower, real quick shower, and it was only in the last corner. So for me, I was like, hey, I can keep this on track until the more rain comes. And that may have been what the forecast said, and that may have been what McLaren were telling their guys as well. But when McLaren spin around and, you know, both of them are off the track and Norris is diving into the pits, I mean, Verstappen, I think initially one more lap went by. Verstappen was initially planning to stay out. And then, you know, they decided to, yeah, because he stayed out one more lap, didn't he? When it was like Norris already pitted and Verstappen stayed out on the mediums. He stayed out and then he boxed. Now, apparently Ferrari told Hamilton, like, hey, like they told Leclerc and Hamilton, like, Verstappen stayed out. But then when Verstappen boxed, they didn't tell him that he boxed. And, you know, that again was one of the things that informed the decision. So this is the thing with Ferrari again. It's like, look, you can have the car, even though they don't have the car, it seems, this year. Certainly not right now, before they make some changes that hopefully will take them for their sake in the right direction. But when push comes to shove and you have moments like this, difficult race, wet conditions, got to make the right strategy call, Ferrari always seem to be on the wrong side of it. And they need to take some, you know, culpability here, really, because Hamilton's race engineer on the radio with him, giving him good or bad information, whatever you think, all Grand Prix, but then when it actually mattered to get it right, Ferrari bottled it. And yeah, as Vasseur says, thinking of the quali pace, we were always slower than McLaren. Today, we were probably on the pace of the Mercedes, but it's difficult to bring anything out of this race. It wasn't the right strategy. We'll focus on the next one. McLaren's a step ahead and behind, we're all very close. So, you know, interesting, right, that Vasseur thinks that today they were kind of on Mercedes pace, and therefore they could have potentially finished third and fourth in another situation. But that's, of course, not what happens. I don't think they really were on Mercedes pace, first of all. I think their tyre degradation seemed to be worse to me, but equally, the strategy did not allow any of that to be possible. So, you know, that's Ferrari's takeaway. Hamilton says he knows what he wants to change on the car to try and give it a better feeling for himself and the team going into China. But, you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what the car looks like if you can't make the right calls in moments like that. You know, those are the type of races that are championship defining, and it's moments like that that Ferrari really need to figure out. So very much interested to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comments. Let's close out then with this. We'll start here actually, because the driver standings are simply the results of the Grand Prix, but the constructor standings pretty notable, right? Because McLaren are at 27, tied with Mercedes. Red Bull are at 18, only of course thanks to Verstappen. That's probably going to be a usual story for the season. Williams in 4th, Aston in 5th, Sauber in 6th, and then Ferrari. Despite a double points finish, technically, they are the lowest of the point scoring teams after the first race. So very much interested to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. I'll see you next time.